Now, in this video, let us look at the long-run equilibrium in a perfectly competitive market. So let us have a look at the first two graphs here that I have drawn at the top. So on the left-hand side, you have the market supply and demand, and I have not yet drawn the market supply and demand curves. So on the left side, you have the market, and on the right side, you have the firm. So for the firm, for an individual representative firm in this competitive industry, we have the marginal cost curve, and we also have the average total cost curve drawn here. Okay. Now, on the left-hand side, imagine that we have a market where we have a demand function drawn like this. And we also have a supply function, and assume that the supply function is up here. So in this market, we have an equilibrium price. And assume that, well, you don't have to assume, but the price is also in a perfectly competitive market. That's also the price that an individual firm is going to see. Okay, so we have the price that prevails in the market, and that price is also seen by the individual firm, and the individual firm is going to set the price equal to the marginal cost, and that is where the firm produces. So let's call this QF. That is the quantity the firm produces, and let's call it here S for short run. Okay, so what happens is that we have this market, and the price is above the average total cost at that point where the firm produces. So in previous videos, where we have seen that this distance here represents a per unit profit to the firm. Okay, so here in this case, the individual firm makes a profit. Now, if the individual firm makes a profit, and since we know that this is a perfectly competitive market where we have many firms like it, then all firms are making a profit. Now, we know that from a perfectly competitive industry that the entry and exit barriers are low, in the sense that everybody who wants to participate in the market can do so. Now here you can imagine that there is an individual market, or a market where firms actually make a profit, and hence this profit is going to attract other industry participants, or it's going to attract other firms that are going to enter the market. So then what happens is that more firms are entering the market. It's called a supply 2. Let's call this supply 1. So here we have an entry of firms into the market, shifting the supply function to the right, and now we have a new market price that is such that the individual firms are not going to make a profit anymore. Okay, so here we now have the QM, and let's call this QM star, and let's call this P star. Okay, so now here we have the situation where the individual firms enter into the market, shifting the supply function to the right, lowering the price, and they enter as long as there's a positive profit in the market, or there's a positive profit to be made. Now, if the price decreases to the minimum of the average total cost function, so we have each individual firm is producing here, let's call this QFL for long run, then each individual firm does not make any profit, and this industry is now in equilibrium. So this condition here we call zero economic profit condition. Okay, so zero. So note that this is economic profit and not accounting profit. Okay, so now here we have the situation where this market is in equilibrium. Now let us look at the situation here where I have redrawn the above picture, but this is a market that is in a long run equilibrium, in the sense that we have supply and demand leading to an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity in the market. And the price is such that it is at the minimum of the average total cost function of a representative firm. So remember that here in the left-hand side, we have the market. And on the right-hand side, we have the representative firm. Okay, so keep in mind that there are many firms like this in the market. Okay, and this is simply one representative firm. Now, let's see what happens if there is actually a change in the supply and demand. Now, let us make it simple and imagine that here we have a market where there is some sort of demand shock, in the sense that suddenly we have more demand, or the demand shifts to the, let's call this G2, or the demand shifts to the right. So you can imagine, for example, that there is a tourist town and those are all souvenir shops, and suddenly we have a higher influx of tourists in the town for whatever reason, and then we are suddenly having a higher demand for souvenirs in that town. So what happens in the short run is that the price is going to increase. So here we have the new higher price, okay? And each individual firm is going to increase their output, okay? So QF, let's call this QF2, okay? So we have the increase in demand that leads to a higher price, let's call this P2, leads to a higher price. Firms increase their production quantity, and this also leads to an increase in the market output here. Let's call this QM2. Now, but as we have seen above, we now have the situation where each individual firm is making a profit. The reason is that we have the price is higher than the average total cost at where firms produce. So firms are making a per unit profit, and hence the total profit would be the per unit profit times the production quantity. That attracts new firms into the market. So what this means is that the supply function, since there are more firms entering, shifts to the right. And the supply function is going to shift to the right up to the point where it is again back to the long run equilibrium. Let's call this QM3, where we now have the price descending back to the minimum of the average total cost function. Okay, so here in this case, you can think about the demand function increasing. That leads in the short run to a higher price. The higher price leads to profits for the individual firms, and then the profits actually increase the supply because we now have new firms entering the market, and new firms enter the market until the price reverts back to the original price, where we have the minimum of the average total cost function, but we do have a higher market output, and the higher market output is because we have now more firms producing at the initial quantity QF and star. Okay, so those graphs illustrate the dynamics of a perfectly competitive market and how it reverts to the zero economic profit condition in the long run.